Wrapped up in the golden light of my bedroom, you take one look at me, then I swoon. I'm here with you. It hasn't been so easy being lonely. Oh, I'm here with you. It hasn't been so easy being lonely. Oh, I'm here with you. It hasn't been so easy being lonely. Oh, I'm here with you. It hasn't been so easy being lonely. Thank you for showing me that I'm not alone. Thank you for showing me that I'm not alone. Thank you for showing me that I'm not alone. Thank you for showing me that I'm never alone.
Ireland and Wales make up the British Isles, as well as Northern Ireland, but that's hard to draw, so I didn't put it on there. Scotland comes from the etymology of the Scoti, which is probably derived from an old Guadelic Celtic word for a small boat, and likely a raiding boat, which is where the Irishmen who would go on to found the Kingdom of Scotland came from Ireland. Now, Ireland, the etymology of this comes from Éireadh, which is an old Irish word, an old Gaelic word for something like plump or prosperous, whereas Wales, the etymology of this comes from the Wala, which is the Old English word for foreigner, as is still found, for example, in Wallonia, which is a similar thing, a border between Germanic and Celtic peoples, where the Germanic ones called the Celtic ones foreigners. Now, interestingly, England is named the only one which is named after the Germanic invaders, which were the Anglo-Saxons. So England comes from Anglaland. But before they were there were actually Celtic-speaking, culturally Celtic people, or Britons, living in England, the same ones who had been found by the Romans when they invaded. And they had lived there for probably a few thousand years before they arrived, before they were ultimately driven out, for the most part, by the Anglo-Saxons. However, a lot of people don't realize that the border between the areas in the Dark Ages, which were culturally Germanic and speaking Old English, and the ones that were Celtic and speaking Celtic languages, that it wasn't actually the borders as we know them between Scotland, England, and Wales, but it looked more something like this, with the very west of England for a long time being culturally Celtic and still Celtic speaking, and obviously the best example of this to this day is Cornwall. Cornwall still has a Celtic language and is fairly well known for being a culturally more Celtic area whereas the north of England, which for a long time was Celtic, is a lot less well known, and that's what I want to look at in this video. If we look at where the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms started to appear, they cluster around the south, and specifically the southeast, whereas in the north you really only have the two, Bernicia and Deira, which formed together to make Northumbria later on, whereas in the northwest you have no Anglo-Saxon kingdoms specifically, although they were later conquered by the Northumbrians. And it's interesting to see that why this happened, because the Hen Ogledd is what was known in Old Welsh as the Old North. And still in Wales, southern Welshmen called the Northerners the Gogs, because I think now in modern Welsh, Gogledd is the word for north. So this is then the etymology for what they called the Old North, which was the part of England in the north, which was Celtic. And actually the Anglo-Saxons, in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, they record lots of battles against the Welsh, or in Wales, whereas they actually mean the Britons, because it was their word for foreigner, remember, which only today has come to mean specifically the Welsh in Wales as we know it now, whereas back then it was for everyone who was a foreigner in the sense that they were a Celtic foreigner, so a Briton. Now, this zoomed in map, you might not be familiar with the geography of the United Kingdom, so just to make it easier, Scotland is up there, Wales is there, and this bit is England, to put things into perspective. Now as well, if you want more, then Newcastle upon Tyne is there, I live there in the Tyne Valley, that's where Edinburgh is, York's down there, Manchester's there, so this is the kind of region we're talking about with the Old North. Now specifically then, I want to look at a few areas where they had the different kingdoms, and the first is the Gododin, and they had a kingdom around Lothian, which is sort of the region where Edinburgh is today. So essentially they were north of the modern border, or it's actually thought that they might have extended down. We're not entirely sure. And we think that the Gododin actually descended from the Votadini, which were, it was a tribe around already when the Romans were here. And some of these tribes in the Old North, the reason why they survived was because they had been planted by the Romans to deal with the ones north of the border and north of Hadrian's Wall. And sometimes they actually planted various tribes who were allied to the Romans just north of the wall so that they could act as a sort of buffer state between them and the people they called the Caledones, later the Picti, the Picts, that kind of thing. Now you have another kingdom called Cregid, which was in sort of modern day Cumbria. It stretched right the way down from actually Galloway and Dumfries, which is actually across the strait there into Scotland, and right the way down to sort of Cumbria, Lancashire, that kind of area. As well as later on you get a kingdom called Strathclyde, which is still actually, that's the only name which is still used in administration in Scotland, around the area of Glasgow, as well as Elmet, which was in Yorkshire. Now we see that the Irish came in through Dalriada, which is where we get the kind of etymology of Scoty and Scotland, because the accepted theory is that they went from Ulster in Northern Ireland, they crossed over the strait to Argyll in southwestern Scotland, and then you had obviously the Picts further north, and both of these, while they are Celtic peoples, aren't counted as being part of the Hen Ogledd, because they were, well, the Picts are always put into their own category. It is thought that they were perhaps Brythonic speakers, like the Hen Ogledd would be, although the Irish were Gaelic speakers, so they were speaking a key Celtic language, whereas the Picts and the Brythonic speakers and the Welsh and the Cornish, they were speaking a P Celtic language, which is a big difference. And then to the east, I already mentioned, you have the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of Bernicia and Deira. Interestingly enough, both of these names are not Germanic. These are thought to be Celtic names from Brynaich and Doir. And Doir, interestingly enough, is from a similar root as Derry in Northern Ireland, and it means something like water, or another possible etymology is something like grove of oak trees. There is a certain as well is the Derwent, which comes from a similar root. And then obviously you have the real Welsh from Wales. So you have Gwynedd, which is in the north of Wales and still is a province there. And actually you had another Brythonic kingdom called Penglyn, which was essentially, I think, that area sort of north of Gloucestershire, sort of south of Lancashire, that kind of area, which was also Brythonic. But this isn't counted as being part of the Old North, because this was conquered by Mercia fairly quickly, while the other northern kingdoms were still around, and it's sort of counted as being more of the traditional Wales rather than the Old North. So, as I mentioned, the people in the Old North, the Brythonic speakers, were probably related to the Picts. The Picts are always an anomaly. I have a video series on them if you're interested, and it's thought that perhaps the Picts were related to the older peoples, the pre-Celtic peoples, although we're not entirely sure. The language is thought to be Brythonic, so they might have been able to understand one another, although they do fight each other at various times. Now, of course, they were more distantly related to the Irish from across the sea. And of course, in this period, the Irish weren't just across the sea. The Irish had colonies in the south of Wales. They had a colony on the Isle of Man. They had, I think, even colonies in England as well as obviously the famous one, which was Dalriada, which was the colony that went across the sea to Scotland and was a large part of the Scottish Isles, were part of Dalriada, as well as sort of Argyll, which is this kind of bit that sticks out of Scotland in the very southwest. Although linguistically they were further apart because the Dalriadan spoke a Godelic, which was the Celtic language spoken in Ireland. Scottish Gaelic today is also Q Celtic and Guadelic in nature because it was brought over by these Irishmen. And actually, the Welsh, they are probably the closest relations to the Hen Ogledd, and they do claim descent from them as well. And these languages were, it's arguable whether the language being spoken in the north, which was Common Brythonic, is just another dialect or Old Welsh. But I'll get into that in a second. Now, the Welsh word for their country is Cymru, and Cymru means kinsman or compatriot, something along those lines. And then it's interesting because they believe that they were actually descended from people of the Hen Ogledd from the Old North, specifically this guy called Cynedda. And Cynedda was a man from the north, and they believe he came down into Wales and settled the north of Wales, specifically Gwynedd, and that he is then the forefather of the kings of Gwynedd. So rather than the Old North being descended from the Welsh actually believed, or the Northern Welsh believed they were descended from people from the north of England, although obviously this was before the Anglo-Saxons had invaded. Now, the word Gogledd is a term used by the Welsh, which is the men of the north. And this is how they but rather related kinsmen as part of Cymru again, as just related peoples, but then living in the north, the men of the north. And then Gogledd again, I think that's more modern Welsh or Old Welsh rather than the Brythonic Ogledd, which is where you get the Hen Ogledd from. Now, if we look again at the map, actually, an interesting comparison is that to this day, Cumberland comes from Cumbria, and Cumbria actually comes from a similar root as the Welsh word for Cymru. So then it comes from Cumbri, and it's from Cumbri, which is obviously meaning kinsman again, which is from Common Brythonic, which is where we get the word Cumbric from. And this is the language that they believe was spoken. So again, if we look at Wales, we see that there are lots of different areas in what used to be the Hen Ogledd, stretching right away from Scotland, Ayrshire, down to Cumbria, which is Keswick, Furness in Lancashire, as well as other parts of what used to be the Old North. All of these, their dialects, are very similar to both modern Welsh and Old Welsh. And this is actually what I posted up on my Twitter the other day about this language. And this was used into the 20th century and probably is still used by shepherds who use it to count their sheep. And it's very interesting because it's a rhyming system of counting which they use. And you can see obviously they are clearly other parts of the Old North. All of these, their dialects are very similar to both modern Welsh and Old Welsh. I'll share with you, which is I think it's the oldest song in, the oldest lullaby in Old Welsh. Well, I think it was written in Cumbric again. So here on the left, I've got it in the Cumbric language, the language of the Old North or Common Brythonic. And then in the middle, I've got a comparison with modern Welsh. And then at the end, I have it in English. And I'm going to play this for you now.
You're right, Poppy. This one, I don't know. Sadly, when I got to dad, I keep on. This far, knowing I'm truly right, the dad I often fly all my time. I still got bright, with my band right. We met the dog, I saw him walking in my sky. In time, tree, Edward, Pimp, West, Side, Waste, now.
Now, as always, link to that will be in the description, and it's important to remember that this poem was found in the same manuscript as the Lament for the Men of the Godolphin, the long poem called O Godolphin. And while I was saying that these languages were the language it was written in was in Cumbric, this is correct, although they were copied over into Old Welsh, and that's why we know about them today, because none of the texts that have ever been found in the north of England were written in Cumbric. And actually, we only know about these because they were found in Wales, which of course remained a Celtic part and still is essentially a Celtic part, whereas the north that became anglicised, and we get all of these sources in Old Welsh, despite them probably being written in Old Cumbric, because Old Welsh and Cumbric were probably very close to one another. And this is because once upon a time, before the Anglo-Saxons came, all the Celtic people, Celtic-speaking peoples, with the possible exception of the Picts, were speaking Common Brittonic in the island of Britain. However, around the time of the Godolphin, which occurred after AD 600, which is when the Battle of Catrach is thought to have taken place, they split, and we get Old Welsh in Wales, West Welsh in Cornwall, and Cumbric being spoken in the north, in the Hen Ogledd. But these languages were obviously related to one another. Now, what actually happened to these kingdoms of the Old North? Because obviously today we don't have any Celtic countries in the north of England. Elmet was conquered by the Darens, or more specifically by Edwin. Elmet was centered around York, and it said that he captured York, which was, I believe it's called Abrauch, by the... Now, Gregor seems to have lasted a while longer, but during the middle of the 8th century, after the death of the 1st century, which then caused a civil war amongst the Britons, the Hen Ogledd were saved. Now, the only other thing that remains of the Hen Ogledd are the occasional place names.
I've been looking for you. I've been looking for you. I've been searching so long.
In a lot of places as well,
I've
like
been looking for you.
Penzance
I've
in
been
Cornwall, for
looking
example.
for
These
you.
are all related ones. You can find a lot of other ones, for example.
It's a wrap.
Aber, which is the mouth of the river in Brythonic, so you see it in Aberystwyth, Aberfelly and Aberdeen, places like that, throughout the quote-unquote Celtic world. And Penn, again, you see that in the Arthur legend. His father, at least in the TV series, was called Uhtred Pendragon. Uhtred is, like in the Last Kingdom, it's actually an Old English name, whereas Penn, again, comes from this Celtic root of being the ford, or the chief, sorry. So, thank you very much for watching this video about the Hen Ogledd, about the quote-unquote Welsh of the North, the Britons of the North, the last Britons of England, which I think is a much neglected story, because everyone knows the story of the Anglo-Saxons and the Celtic peoples in the south. But I think both the Anglo-Saxon story of the North and ultimately the Brittonic story of the North are much neglected, which is a shame, because these are as interesting, if not more so, because they lasted a lot longer. Their influence can still be seen a lot more than in the southeast, for example. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this video about the Hen Ogledd, the Old North, and some of the history surrounding it. If you'd like to see more, just leave a comment in the comment section below. I will link videos that are related to this, which I have made, and
breaking promises before we could keep. We're trigger avalanches unknowingly. We're traveling and now we take off with land. We're living impulse like we don't have a plan. This is a journey and we've got it all. And when it stops, we're feeling miserable. Well, we're breaking promises before we could keep. We're trigger hurricanes unwillingly. It's our fault. When it all breaks into everyone's life, why are we really to blame? It's like a pain in the chest. It's fever and ecstasy. So many people around. We're disappointed and down. And though we're trying the best, it's fever and ecstasy. It's fever and we're breaking promises before we could keep. We trigger avalanches unknowingly. Oh, we're not so different from convicts on the run. Freedom kills, but we'd rather go on. This is a journey and we wanna go far. They say we're selfish, but this plan is on fire. We're breaking promises we wanted to keep. We trigger hurricanes unwillingly. It's our fault. When it all breaks into everyone's life, still we would do it again. It's like a pain in the chest. It's fever and ecstasy. So many people around. We're disappointed and down. Oh, we're trying our best. It's fever and ecstasy. It's fever and ecstasy. Like a pain in the chest. It's fever and ecstasy. So many people around. We're disappointed and down. And though we're trying our best, it's fever and ecstasy. Our only mission, our destiny. I still have some pictures on my wall. I still know the places where they're from. I still find all answers in the trees. I still feel the common devotion of the places where they're from. Power bound, holding a palm full of miracles. Power bound, building a house of the moon. Do you really Oh, I still love this nonsense team we made. And I still think we're still the same. How about holding a pound full of miracles? How about building a house on the moon? Do you really wanna go back in time? Do you really wanna go back in time? Oh, do you really wanna go back in time? 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 In the kingdom of Renee, virgin on a lucky of gold, in dice of houses cast with bay and sheepdog.
Tie the goats to my car with tansy rods, their faces cover. Push doors into the windows, damp the coals, and bar the door with blinding colors along the mirror stretching as far as the eye can see. I am walking, I see weeds by a mama coming from the wood. Beans are snapping off stems and the flowers smelling paralyzed, I watch my child cry like a jellyfish across the pond.
Hen Ogledd, the Old North, the cultural survivor of Wales. Wales has a story that isn't being told in the English language until recently because of the Norman Welsh Not programme. So now we can speak English, whether we meddle and Cymraeg, and all of the pieces of the puzzle are ours to unpick as we will. Now for a bit of fun, same band, Hen Ogledd, Tiny, 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 Tiny Witch Hunter. Now I'm going to have to stop.